Chris Rufo, thanks for being here. I'm going to hand it off to you to intro the show here and play MC. I think you can use that one. I'll leave this one up here.
Right.
So go ahead, man.
Well, how is everyone?
Oops.
Is this one working? No?
Got to turn it on.
Got to turn it on.
There you go.
All right, there we go. Good. How is everyone? Fantastic. It's good to see everybody. Beautiful day here in the Northwest. As someone said before, I live here, so I actually really do care. You know, a lot of the events that you do, you kind of fly in, you fly out. You care about Cleveland for like maybe 12 hours, and then you leave and you forget about it. But it really does matter because this, I think, is the most beautiful state of all of our 50 states, is it not? Yeah. And, you know, unfortunately, the natural beauty maintains itself, but the politics is not as beautiful as it should be in the great state of Washington. And I think that today's program and tomorrow's program are going to go a long way to giving you all of the information and the inspiration to actually punch back against some of the really deranged and destructive people who have tighten their grip over the politics of this state. They're not sending their best to Olympia, and I think it's time to enact some serious changes. And it's going to happen because of groups like this. You know, Brian and Steve have done an incredible job setting up a permanent infrastructure. And these are two gentlemen that could at any moment have checked out for a life of leisure at the beach somewhere, but they've made this their home. It's been their home, and they're going to fight for what is right. And so the infrastructure is really important. The people, the actual flesh and blood of a political movement is very important. And the ideas are important. And that is my specialty. I fight with ideas, with language, try to turn it into political reality. And so I think, you know, half of the battle is really thinking clearly about the state of our politics, the state of our state, and what we can do to change it. And I can think of no one better to give you a broad-based understanding of what's happening in our world than Dr. Gad Saad, who has been a friend of mine for a number of years, but actually just in the lobby earlier this morning was the first time I'd met him in person. And so he is really someone that has a deep understanding of political ideas, of how culture changes, and I think will give us a sense of what we can do to fight this here in our home state. Don't hold this against him, but he is a Canadian. And, you know, Canadians are actually really valuable. You know, they're like the canaries in the coal mine because however bad you think the politics is in Washington state, it's worse in Canada. And so just as, you know, if you're in the kind of Seattle metro area, you feel like you're maybe 5 years ahead of what's going to hit the Midwest or the East Coast. You know, we're like oracles to people back east. You know, whenever I go to D.C. or New York, they're always, you know, I'm like an oracle or a sage. I can tell the future. It's really amazing. But I'm actually not predicting the future at all. I'm just explaining to them abstractly what's happening in Seattle. You know, what's next, what's happening. And so Gad Saad is like 10 years ahead. You know, he really is ahead of it. And so we want to welcome to the stage Gad Saad, also in conversation with Ari Hoffman, who is, you know, holding it down here in Washington. He's got that nitty-gritty insight. So it's going to be a great conversation. Let's give them a huge, warm Washington welcome and hear what they have to say.
All right, hi everybody. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I get going. Number one, there's a bunch of signed copies of the Parasitic Mind, which I spent about 45 minutes signing for you. You don't have to pay for them if you're at the conference. My understanding is you go and pick one up outside, so make sure to pick yours up. Number two, usually I would be dressed only a bit more formally than I am now, possibly coming with my velvet red suit. But I'm not, because we were stranded in a really, really difficult place to be stranded in Bermuda. We were on a family vacation for 2 weeks, and then we were supposed to return to Montreal, our home city, and then fly from Montreal to Seattle. But then due to the monopolistic powers of Air Canada, they went on strike, the stewardesses, and so we ended up staying a few extra days in Bermuda. So this is the best I can do in terms of vacation clothes, sartorial clothes. Thank you. So hopefully I can get out of here at some point. It looks like Thursday might be the day, but maybe you'll see me hanging around here at an Antifa encampment later this week in Seattle. All right, so let's get going. So today what I'd like to do is talk about many of the ideas that I've been warning people about, as Chris mentioned, never mind for 10 years, for 25 years, because I've been a professor now. This is going to be my 32nd year as a professor. And if you really want to understand the craziness, all of the crazy ideas stem from the university ecosystem. And I've been warning people for years. People are starting to pay attention, but regrettably, maybe it's slightly bit too late, but maybe we could still turn it around. So I'll talk about the parasitic mind, and then I'll mention a bit some of the key points from my forthcoming book titled Suicidal Empathy, which, based on sort of the virality of the term, it might end up being even a bigger success than Parasitic Mind. So please make sure to go out and pre-order your copy when it's available. And I'll also talk a bit about some of the Jew hatred that I thought I had escaped long ago in Lebanon, but has certainly come back with full gusto and force. You are the first to know of my new affiliation, by the way. Starting, I think it was August 16th, so a couple of days ago, I was a visiting professor at Northwood University, which is referred to as the Free Enterprise University. And this next year, I will be a visiting scholar at the University of Mississippi, the Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom, where they defend. It's sad to say, but in academia, being at a place where people defend Judeo-Christian ethics, American exceptionalism, the deontological principles that make the West great, you need to go to Ole Miss to be able to find like-minded people. And actually, there's quite a few centers of freedom that are sprouting across several universities, many of which are in the South. And so maybe this is a good sort of harbinger of what's to come. All right, so let's get going. So let me tell you a bit about my childhood in Lebanon, because in a sense, it helped me understand some of the parasitic ideas that we now see so well entrenched in the West. So we were part of the last group of Lebanese Jews that had remained in Lebanon until the mid-70s. Much of my extended family had already left, most of them to Israel, but some to France, some to Canada. And then when the Civil War broke out in the mid-70s, it became impossible to be Jewish in Lebanon. And so the photo on the left is the one, actually this is very close to where my house was in Lebanon. And the photo on the right, regrettably, is what my childhood looked like when I was 10 and 11 years old. The first time that I ever remember that I'm cognizant of having experienced Jew hatred in Lebanon, many people refer to Lebanon as the Paris of the Middle East and as a pluralistic, multicultural, multi-ethnic society. I mean, yes, in the context of the Middle East. Tolerance in the Middle East is not necessarily tolerance as you would understand it in the West. And so the first time that I was exposed to really a disturbing exemplar of Jew hatred was when, if you see the gentleman there, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was a pan-Arabist, the president of Egypt, who was very much revered by all the Arab nations because he was trying to unite all of the Arabs. And when he passed away in 1970, I hadn't yet turned 6. He passed away, and as often happens in the Middle East, people take to the street, they start doing this kind of fervor and lamentations and religious incantations. But they all kept singing as they were proceeding down my street, "Death to Jews, death to Jews." And I turned to my mother as a 5-year-old boy, and I asked her, why are they saying death to Jews because this guy passed away? And she just said, shut up, keep your head down. And that was the first time that I experienced what happens in the Middle East, where every single calamity is ultimately blamed on the Jews. And I hate to say it, that in interacting with people on social media, that reflex has come back with full throttle, with full force. Every possible calamity that you could think of is blamed on me, literally. I am the head of the Mossad who is orchestrating all of the calamities in the world. This is what happens when your brain is parasitized by Jew hatred. And the gentleman on the right, I don't know if you could read, he wrote, "Death to all Jews." This is where the meme, which I always refer to the Jews as the evil juice, it actually comes from this gentleman. If you're going to exterminate us, at least have the decency to know how to spell us. This is a photo of a class picture. I'm probably around 9. I'm in the first row, second from my left, with the slightly longish hair. And the teacher asks the class, I mean, not during this particular photo, but in the classroom, for everybody to stand up in turn and tell the class what they want to be when they grow up. I want to be a policeman, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a soccer player. Well, one of the kids that here said, when I grow up, I want to be a Jew killer, to everybody's raucous laughter and clapping, right? It was totally normal to say this. He fully knew that there were 2 Jewish kids in that classroom. I grew up with that kid, but it was perfectly normalized. This is intolerant Paris of the Middle East. This is actual newspaper clippings from my brother who had won the Lebanese judo championship several years in a row. Well, it was quite shameful in a culture of honor and shame to have a lowly Jew winning the Lebanese championship. And so he was visited by some gentleman after he had won the championship several years in a row. And it was explained to him that it was time for him to retire, lest there might be some accident that might befall him. And he wasn't willing to retire. He ended up leaving Lebanon in 1973, before the Civil War, and he pursued his career in France. France has a big history of judo, also soccer. Now, in 1976, ironically, when we had already emigrated to Montreal, the 1976 Montreal Olympics happened, well, in Montreal, and he ended up representing Lebanon in the 1976 Olympics. So the guy who suffered from a terminal disease called being Jewish in 1973 and had to leave Lebanon, we can overlook the fact that you're Jewish because at least you can carry the Lebanese flag. He unfortunately ended up losing in the first round, I think, to a Bulgarian. But again, that gives you a sense of what it is to be a religious minority in beautiful, tolerant Lebanon. This is an actual photo of my parents who were married in 1950. Thank God they're both still alive. My father's 95, my mother's 91. Thank you. On one of the return trips to Lebanon, after we had immigrated to Montreal, they still had business interests in Lebanon. They were kidnapped by Fatah, which was one of the really nasty Palestinian groups, and some really bad things happened to them for quite a few days, about 8 days. And then luckily, because of our political connections, we were able to get them out. So many of the hostage stories that I hear today happening, after October 7th, was my childhood. One more story about sort of my background. And the reason why I tell this story is because Lebanon is the perfect model of what happens to a society that is organized along identity politic lines, right? Everything in Lebanon is viewed through the prism of your religious appartenance, your belonging. On your internal ID card, if the cops stop you, they don't care about your height or about your eye color or your weight. The most conspicuous thing is what is your religion, right? As a matter of fact, Lebanon, the seats, who gets to be president, who gets to be prime minister, who gets to be speaker of the House, how many seats are allotted to each members in parliament depends on your religion. So, to see the West saying, hey, this is a great idea, let's really double down on identity politics, well, as someone who comes from such a society, it never ends up well for its citizens. So, last story here. As we were leaving on that fateful day in late October 1975, Lebanon, for good, to move to Montreal, as we were clearing the airspace of Lebanon, the pilot said, okay, we've now cleared the Lebanese airspace. And so my mother takes out a Star of David, puts it around my neck and says, well, now you can wear this, be proud of who you are, and not hide your identity. Now, hold on to the story. Fast forward to a couple of weeks after October 7th, 2023, my son, who is sitting in this room, had gone to play a soccer match in the east end of Montreal, where there's a particular demographic group that is now quite prevalent there. And as he and my wife picked me up from the cafe where I was working on my latest book, he said to me, Daddy, had you come to watch me play soccer today, and if you were wearing a Star of David, you'd be dead. So 45 years ago, I escaped Lebanon so that I can finally put a Star of David. 45 years later, I better not wear a Star of David in Montreal, Lebanon. And just to give you a sense of how bad it is in Montreal, this is an article that I had written in the National Post a while ago about how difficult it is to be Jewish at my university, my home university, the one that I hold tenure at, has been referred to colloquially as Gaza University for well over 20 years. Benjamin Netanyahu had been canceled. He had been stopped from speaking there back in 2002. And again, that arises because the demographic realities are such that it now empowers those people to be able to do what they do. So what you're seeing in terms of the college protests with the Hamas and the Kafia and all this, it's just because demography is destiny, right? It doesn't take a fancy professor to explain to you that if you bring in people into your society where, according to a wide range of nonpartisan surveys, the people that are coming from those societies, when they are surveyed, they exhibit somewhere between 95 to 99% endemic Jew hatred. So if you sample 1,000 people, 950 to 990 of them, right, are saying that, yeah, Jews, they're a real problem. We got to get rid of the Jews. So if you let in millions of such people into your society, do you think that Jew hatred is going to go up or it's going to go down? So it doesn't take a fancy evolutionary behavioral scientist to explain to you what the dynamics will be. So this is actually the photo on the right is the Montreal police. This is not campus police. This is the Montreal SWAT police standing there with all their attire to protect the Jewish students and the professor to walk into campus. So I've now taken a 2-year leave of absence, and inshallah, as we say in the Middle East, maybe this will turn into a permanent leave and I'll be moving to the United States, we'll see, because it's no longer feasible for me to walk on campus, because unlike the Jewish students who are otherwise anonymous, I'm not anonymous, and so it's become very, very difficult for me to actually walk on campus. That should make the hair in the back of your neck really tingle, because as Chris said, what happens there is going to happen here. Now, you think you're protected because the United States is a huge country. It's 340 million people. But again, it's the boiling frog parable, right? By the time that you notice it, it's too late, right? In some cases, it takes 5 years for a society to get Islamized. Some cases, it takes 500 years. But once the process begins, unless there is a cataclysmic autocorrection, the patterns are very clear. So you have been forewarned. Now, how did I first get into all of this parasitic stuff? My scientific work is in applying evolutionary biology and studying human behavior, specifically consumer behavior, economic behavior. And so I founded a field which I coined evolutionary consumer behavior, where I bring in principles, biological principles, to explain the biological underpinnings of what makes us the consumers that we are. How do hormones affect our behavior, for example? Well, to me, that seemed like a pretty obvious statement to make. Of course, human beings in general and consumers in particular are biological beings. But to nearly every single one of my social science colleagues, that was complete heresy. What the hell are you talking about? We're biological beings. No way. We transcend our biology. Biology matters for the mosquito. Biology matters for the zebra, for your dog. But surely you're not saying, Professor Saad, that biology affects human behavior. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, imbecile, right? But it was very, very difficult for all of my, highfalutin progressive Lisp colleagues to be able to accept the most banal statement that, of course, you can't study human behavior void of an understanding of our biological imperatives. So now you could start seeing how then the transgender activism. If your genitalia and your chromosomes don't explain anything, then up is down, left is right, men are women, and so on. And so I started seeing these parasitic ideas 30 plus years ago and standing on top of the mountain and warning people, but people weren't willing to listen. Well, now they're listening. So let me explain why I use this parasitic framework. So the two greatest threats facing humanity, certainly in our evolutionary history, would be biological pathogens. I mean, mosquitoes kill more people throughout history than all other animals combined by many orders of magnitude, right? And it's a pathogen that kills the human, whether it be yellow fever or whether it be malaria. So it could be fungi, it could be bacteria, it could be viruses, it could be parasites. Biological pathogens have killed more people than all other things combined. Well, in my book, I argue that human beings can be parasitized by a second class of pathogens, and I call these ideological pathogens, or parasitic ideas, or idea pathogens. And let me explain how I got that eureka. So in nature, you have the field of parasitology is the study of the interaction between parasites and hosts. And there are innumerable examples of that. So for example, a tapeworm can parasitize your intestinal tract. But a neuroparasite is one that looks to ultimately end up in the host's brain, altering its circuitry to typically suit its reproductive interest, right? And so you could now see how it becomes a very, very powerful metaphor to then use for ideological parasitic ideas. So if you look at the top image to the left, you have a spider wasp, which is much smaller than the spider that it tries to zombify. Once it stings it, it renders the spider completely zombified. It then drags it to its burrow, lays its eggs on it, and then as the eggs hatch, they eat the spider in vivo. The spider is fully conscious, is fully aware, but it is fully parasitized. Now, it's a very easy analogy to make that political correctness is akin to the spider-wasp sting, right? We merrily walk to the abyss of infinite lunacy saying, yes, yes, of course, men too can menstruate. Yes, yes, of course, men too can bear children. And so you can begin to see why that analogy between actual physical brainworms and ideological brainworms is so powerful. I won't go through all of these, but the other one that some of you may have heard of is Toxoplasma gondii, which infects, actually it can infect human brains, but the classic example is when it infects the brains of mice. When it is infected by this particular neuroparasite, it loses its innate fear of cats, and it actually becomes sexually attracted to the cat's urine, which is not a very good mating strategy for the mouse. But then I'm going to talk about the wood cricket, because some of you have seen me use the term, which has now become viral, when I refer to someone as a wood cricket Jew. And so you'll see in a second, if you're not familiar with that term, where it comes from. The wood cricket abhors water. It wants nothing to do with water. But when it is parasitized by a hairworm, the hairworm needs the wood cricket to jump into the water in order for it to complete its reproductive cycle. In jumping into the water, it happily commits suicide. So again, you could now see how powerful that is as an analogy. So now we're going to come to some human wood crickets. So Queers for Palestine is the perfect example of wood crickets. If you are queer, more power to you. Let's celebrate your queerness. Rah, rah. But if that is the most important marker of your identity, then should you not be putting all of your chips behind Tel Aviv, which happens to be one of the most queer-friendly societies in the world, short of Montreal, short of San Francisco, short of New York? Probably Tel Aviv is in the top 5 most queer-friendly societies. But no, when you are a wood cricket queer, then what happens is you put all your chips behind Gaza, because it turns out, I'm here to tell you, that Gaza has come up with a very, very powerful 100% conversion therapy. It's a gravity-based conversion therapy. We take you from the top building as inscribed by the noble faith of Islam, and we throw you head first, and that usually solves your queerness issues. Anna Epstein, Jewish Anna Epstein, is a wood cricket Jew because she was so progressive at Boston University that when the October 7th children who were 3 months old and 4 months old were kidnapped, right? They couldn't have been IDF soldiers if that's the argument you're going to use. They're children, infants. She was ripping them down, and when she was caught on tape, she said, "But I'm Jewish." Now, what would have happened to Anna Epstein had she been at that Nova dance festival? All of her progressive markers would not have saved her from the exact same gang rapes as all the other hapless women who were there. But that's what happens when you become a wood cricket. And then finally, this guy, I actually have him front and center in my forthcoming book on suicidal empathy. He is a Norwegian man who defines himself as anti-racist and a male feminist. Well, he was sodomized by a Somali immigrant. And when the Somali immigrant was caught, he served a very minimal sentence, I think 2-3 years, because the Norwegians are a lot more empathetic than all of you degenerates who believe that there should be repercussions for your crimes. And so after he was about to be released, he was going to be deported back to Norway. Well, this guy came out and said that he feels terribly guilty that this beautiful Somali sodomizer was going to be deported to Mogadishu, because then he wouldn't be able to fully live out his life the way that he wanted. Or to use the terms of Abraham Maslow, he can't be fully self-actualized in Mogadishu. Well, I'm here to tell you that it is not part of our evolutionary-based emotional repertoire to feel empathy for those who sodomize us. But when you become a suicidally empathetic person, as regrettably we now have a terminal stage 4 manifestation of suicidal empathy in the West, that's what happens. I care so much about the one who raped me that I can't bear to think that he's going to be, shipped back to Mogadishu. Here's another example. This is from the Parasitic Mind. I won't read the actual passage that I wrote. I'll just explain it. Tal Nitzan was a Jewish doctoral student who was working on a research project at Hebrew University, which is one of the most prestigious universities in Israel, in Jerusalem. She wanted to identify the rampant rape of Palestinian women by IDF soldiers. Well, she went ahead and did all her research, and it's not as though she only asked IDF soldiers whether they rape women. She went to the Palestinians, she looked for actual records. I mean, it was a doctoral work, and she wasn't able to identify a single documented case of an IDF soldier raping a Palestinian woman. Now, usually in science, if you have epistemological humility, if your hypothesis is falsified, well, it happens, and so be it. But she can't let go of the fact that her own people, she's Israeli and Jewish, but she's so progressive that she is wedded to the idea that the IDF are the new instantiation of Nazism. So what do you think she came up with to be able to still fully support her hypothesis? You ready? The fact that there is not a single woman that was raped by the IDF soldiers shows you how much the Jews dehumanized the Palestinian women, that they don't even consider them worthy of rape. You heard that? So if she had found that the IDF soldiers had raped women, this would prove that the IDF soldiers are evil. And if she finds that not a single case of rape has occurred, that exactly also proves how evil they are. All roads lead to the Jews being evil. And in this case, as espoused by a fellow Jew. That's what suicidal empathy is. So what are some of the parasitic ideas that I discuss in the book? The granddaddy of them all is postmodernism, because that is the framework that allows all of the other parasitic ideas to flourish, whether it be cultural relativism or social constructivism or radical feminism. It all comes from postmodernism, which purports that there are no objective truths. There are no aesthetic objective standards. There is no musical universal tones that people are attracted to. There is no epistemological truth. Up is down, left is right. It's my truth, not the truth. And so you could imagine that if you espouse this kind of intellectual terrorism for 30, 40, 50 years, you end up with many of the problems we see today. And I'll give you some examples of these. This is I'm only bringing Canadian examples because, as Chris said, I do suffer from the regrettable fact of being Canadian. And so this is an NSERC grant. NSERC is the equivalent of, let's say, an NSF grant in the United States, a National Science Foundation grant. It's at the University of Waterloo, which is akin to, say, MIT or Caltech. It's a historically top engineering and computer science school. So for those of you who are old enough to remember Fortran, the Fortran language, the compiler was developed at University of Waterloo. So they recently had Canada Research Chair professorships. Canada Research Chairs are the most prestigious professorships because they are endowed by the Canadian government. So this is the top possible professorship that you can have. And here are the positions that they had opened. And just for you, because oftentimes people think, oh, I'm being satirical, I'm using my hyperbolic humor and so on. So this is the actual screenshot. So let me read it for you. So the first one is, all areas of artificial intelligence will be looked at, but the call is only open to qualified individuals who self-identify as women, transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, or two-spirit. So imagine you all now have a sense of what AI is to the world. Well, Canada is saying, for you to get the highest professorship at a Canadian university in AI, I need to see that you are two-spirit or gender fluid. Yeah. This was recently. This is not, it's not as though Donald Trump ascended to the throne, so to speak, and all of this woke stuff has gone away. And so Chris was exactly right. If you want to see what's coming to the United States, just look a bit north and you'll know what's coming. This is at my own university. You know, every few years you've got a strategic plan that comes out of, you know, what the university should do over the next 5 years, strategic mission. Well, the number one item at our university is to decolonize and indigenize the entire curriculum. So if you're teaching neuroscience, or you're teaching mechanical engineering, or you're a number theorist, you're studying the distribution of prime numbers, or you're an evolutionary psychologist, you study psychology of decision-making, you study human mating preferences, all of these fields now, both in your research and in your pedagogy, should have an incorporation of indigenization. Well, I studied mathematics. One of my degrees is in mathematics and computer science. I wasn't aware that the distribution of prime numbers would depend on whether I'm indigenous or two-spirit or genderqueer. But apparently even number theory could be elevated by incorporating this stuff. This is happening at leading universities in Canada. This, I won't go, usually I have a whole setup for this, but maybe some of you have already heard the story, so I'll do it very quickly. This is based on a conversation I had in 2002. So this is already 23 years ago, with a graduate student who was studying postmodernism, and we couldn't agree on the fact that within Homo sapiens, only women bear children, because she argued that there's a Japanese tribe off a Japanese island whereby it is the men who bear children in the folkloric mythological realm. And then if you're wondering why there is a dancing hyena in the other picture, I asked her whether she agreed or disagreed with the fact that mariners, since time immemorial, have relied on the premise that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And there she used a variant of postmodernism called deconstructionism. This is Jacques Derrida. Language creates reality. She said, what do you mean by east and west? And what do you mean by the sun? That which you call the sun, I may call dancing hyena. I said, well, the dancing hyena rises in the east and sets in the west. And she said, I don't play those label games. Now, why do I always tell that story? Well, for two reasons. Number one, because this was a graduate student at one of the leading universities, not only in Canada and the world. But number two, it happened in 2002. So for those of you who recently woke up from your stupor and slumber and said, hey, gee, I wasn't aware that there are 6'4" women with 9-inch penises that are taking showers with my 12-year-old daughter. You woke up to it now, but some of us have been warning you about this for almost 30 years, so wake up. This is social constructivism and biophobia, which are two other very destructive idea pathogens. Social constructivism is the idea that everything is due to a social construction. There are no biological imperatives. There are no biological universals. You are born tabula rasa, and it is only a sequence of socialization that makes you who you are. Now, on the one hand, it's a very hopeful message, although perfectly rooted in bullshit, because it basically says that, hey, if you have a child, he too can be the next Michael Jordan, Einstein, or Lionel Messi. If only you could find the exact schedule of reinforcements and punishments, hence socialization, he too can be Lionel Messi. But the reality is, it didn't matter how much my parents hugged me or didn't hug me. I was never going to be as good as Michael Jordan as a basketball player because I don't have the height to be as good as Michael Jordan, right? And so, but that is viewed as a deeply constraining idea, that there might be individual differences in biological potentialities across people. It's a lot kinder and empathetic to argue that we are all due to strictly social construction. Biophobia is simply the idea that using biology to explain human affairs is very nefarious. It's akin to Nazism. And so you can see how if you take this whole cocktail of idea pathogens, you end up with all of the things that are now part of your daily realities. Here, I just want to take a few minutes. It's going to be slightly technical, but I think it's well worth it. In Chapter 7 of The Parasitic Mind, where I explain how to seek truth, I argue that there is a mind vaccine for being inoculated against nonsense. And I call this nomological networks of cumulative evidence. Now, it's a mouthful, so let me explain what I mean by that. In the middle of this diagram, you have a statement that I'm trying to prove to you. I want to prove to you that biological forces shape toy preferences. And the reason why I've chosen this example is because usually social scientists argue that the reason why little Johnny prefers to play with a truck and little Linda prefers to play with a doll is because of the evil patriarchal parents that simply impose these arbitrary gender norms. And so if I'm able to demonstrate to you otherwise, then hopefully I can move you away from being, stricken by social constructivism idea pathogen. So how would I go about doing that? So let me show you how I would do it. I would get you data across cultures, across time periods, across methodologies, across species, all of which prove my point. So let me give you some examples. I won't do the whole thing, but I'll do a few. Well, developmental psychologists have shown that children already exhibit those sex-specific toy preferences when they are too young to be socialized. In other words, by definition, you're ruling out the social constructivist argument, right? So 3-month-old children are already going towards the sex-specific toys at an age when they couldn't have been socialized. Okay, so that's already one nail against the social constructivists. I can get you data from other animals, vervet monkeys, rhesus monkeys, chimpanzees, showing you that their infants exhibit the same sex-specific toy preferences that human infants do. I can get you data from pediatric endocrinology, where little girls who suffer from congenital adrenal hyperplasia, this is an endocrinological disorder that masculinizes the behavior of little girls. Well, little girls who suffer from this disorder, what do you think happens to their toy preferences? They're perfectly reversed, and they become akin to those of little boys. I can get you data from sub-Saharan nomadic cultures where they exhibit the exact same toy preferences, suggesting that it can't be only a Western construct. Oh, but Professor Saad, but those are all contemporary examples. No problem. I can get you data from 2,500 years ago where an analysis of funerary monuments in ancient Greece and ancient Rome shows little boys playing with the exact same sex-specific toys that we have today. So what you see is I've brought you distinct lines of evidence stemming from many, many different areas, all of which triangulate to demonstrate that my position is the veridical one. So one of the reasons why it's very hard to cancel me is because whenever I appear anywhere, I've already built my requisite nomological network. So good luck to you if you wish to debate me. And that also allows me to have epistemological humility, meaning that if you ask me a question that I don't feel sufficiently knowledgeable about, I'm very disciplined to say, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. So you could never catch me, so to speak, with my pants down, because I know what I know and I know what I don't know. So for those of you who are going to hostile territory to present ideas, build your nomological network, and that makes you a formidable interlocutor. Let's keep going. This is from chapter 6 in the parasitic mind. Ostrich parasitic syndrome. Now, the ostrich doesn't literally bury its head in the sand, but it's become an apt metaphor for anyone who wishes to deny reality. And regrettably, ostrich parasitic syndrome is a malady that has deeply infected, certainly Western politicians. Let me give you one example of that. Now, this number here is actually, it keeps changing every day. It's much higher now. This was, I think the last time I did this was maybe a month ago. So since 9/11 alone, there have been this is as of about a month ago, there have been almost 48,000 Islamic terror attacks in nearly 70 countries, where the terrorists have expressly stated that the reason why they're doing what they're doing is because of a specific tenet or tenets from within their faith, okay? And in many cases, they will do a public video invoking the specific passages that justify them doing what they're doing. But in the West, we're much more sophisticated than that. We don't believe what the terrorists tell us, so we come up with alternate ostrich-based explanations for why these terror attacks have happened. Let me just mention a few of these. It turns out, as a Jewish Belgian politician explained to us when there was a terror attack in Belgium, he said that probably the main reason why Muhammad, Mahmoud, and Ahmad committed their crime in Belgium is because of lack of art exposure. Because this is one of the reasons why I always explain to my children that I always want to expose them to art, because if they don't do that, they're easy targets for ISIS recruitment. I'm not finished. Bill Nye, who is very smart because he's referred to as the science guy, plus he wears a bow tie, so he must be smart, explained to us after the Bataclan attack in Paris, where I think almost 180 people were mowed down like insignificant mosquitoes at a concert while screaming Allahu Akbar, right? Which doesn't mean, by the way, God is great. It means our God is greater. It's a supremacist statement. It's not kumbaya coexist. It's Allah is bigger than all of your gods. Yes? Well, Bill Nye explained to us on a Huffington Post interview that it was very, very likely that what caused those guys to do what they did is due to climate change, of course. Right? So a lot of you kind of simpleton imbeciles thought that when they invoked the specific Quranic verse to do what they did, that's why they did it. The reality is lack of solar panels in Syria. That's what caused it. So how could you win a war where people are disparasitized? And I see this every single day in my faculty lounges. A bunch of complete morons with a bunch of degrees after their names. Here's another one that you're going to enjoy. For those of you who don't know this, this is covered extensively. I have a whole chapter on this in my forthcoming book, Suicidal Empathy. Grooming rape gangs have been happening in the United Kingdom for about 25 years, up and down England, in every town you could think of. In the extraordinary majority of cases, it's Asian men doing it. But Asian men is weird because Japanese men are Asian, Lebanese men are Asian, but that's not what we really mean. We really mean Pakistani Muslim men, but that would be marginalizing and Islamophobic to say that they do it because of that. So therefore, we use euphemisms, such as Asian men. In France, we call them les jeunes, the youths. So when they go around causing havoc in all of the suburbs of Paris, we don't say it's Ahmed and Muhammad, we just call them the youths, because it's a lot more kind and empathetic. Now, I took one of these cases. It's called the Huddersfield Gang. This is the Huddersfield Gang for the town of Huddersfield, which is a small town. And they caught 20 guys. Sorry, I'm just going to, I can't read it here. Muhammad Kamir, Muhammad Rizwan Aslam, Nahman Muhammad, Nasrat Hussein, Muhammad Ifraz. And so I put all of these Muhammad names up, and I said, I'm not smart enough. I don't have the big data analytic brain to be able to see what is a universal theme tying all these perpetrators together. Could anybody help me out? Well, a lot of people wrote back to me, and guess what they came up with as the real culprit of the Huddersfield gang rapes? Who was it? The Jews. They weren't being facetious. They weren't being jocular. Why was it the Jews? And so I came up with the mathematical equations. 3 Muhammads equal Mordechai. When 3 Muhammads gang rape your daughter, the real rapist is Mordechai. How? Can somebody tell me the logic? Anybody? Sorry? Exactly. Because it turns out that the immigration policy of every Western country, including Denmark, including Sweden, Spain, France, every country, Britain, yes, you might think that the immigration ministers in those countries are not Jewish, but behind them, there's a cabal of NGOs controlled by Jews that let them in. So what's the point about being angry against the Muhammads when the real culprits is literally me, the head of the Jews? So how can you fight a battle when you can't even identify who the real enemy is? So if your physician tells you you have stage 4 pancreatic cancer and you say, yes, but the real problem is dandruff, well, then you're probably going to die soon. And that's what's happening in the West. In a complete inability to see things that an average lobotomized 3-day-old pigeon sees, but we can't see it because we're kind and empathetic. So let me talk briefly. I'll try to wrap it up soon. In my so the parasitic mind talks about what happens to our cognitive system when it is parasitized, meaning our thoughts. But human beings are both a thinking and feeling animal, yes? And therefore, suicidal empathy completes the story by explaining what happens when our emotional system is parasitized. And why do I focus specifically on empathy? Because empathy turns out to be a very important human virtue, right? So it's not an attack on empathy. As a matter of fact, for a social species, we need to be empathetic. So for example, theory of mind is the idea that for me to have a relevant conversation with Ari, I need to be able to put myself in his mind. One of the ways that you identified that someone is autistic when they're a young child is you give them what's called a theory of mind test and they fail it. So theory of mind and empathy are very important mechanisms, but as Aristotle explained to us many thousands of years ago, all good things in good measure, at the right time, at the right place, and to the right targets, right? So orgiastic empathy that is completely dysregulated leads to major problems. If you care more about MS-13 gang members than you care about American vets, then you are suffering from suicidal empathy. If you think that all immigrants, irrespective of where they come from, are equally likely to assimilate, then you suffer from suicidal empathy. If you think that it is unfair to take huge homeless encampments where people are shooting up heroin in front of your children would be mean, that's suicidal empathy, right? And so what I demonstrate in this book is that every single one of the things that keeps everybody in this room up at night stems from dysregulated suicidal empathy. And so that's the next book. I hope that you'll all get it. So let me wrap up with some sort of calls to action. So how do we save our universities? And the reason why I focus here on universities is because, again, all of these dreadful ideas originate from the universities. How do we save our universities? Well, we pursue knowledge unencumbered by ideological activism. No knowledge is forbidden if gathered objectively, right? So one of the things, for example, if you want to have an end to your career in academia, study sex differences or race differences. Because if the results don't come out according to the progressive calculus, then you're dead. If the results show that women are superior on a task, then publish the results. God forbid if the results show that men might be better at any task, you better make those data disappear, because then you are promulgating tired, sexist, patriarchal stereotypes. No, there is no forbidden knowledge in science if pursued objectively. Number two, freedom of speech, freedom of inquiry, and the pursuit of truth are deontological principles. For those of you who don't know what that term means, deontological means absolute. So for example, if you say it is never okay to lie, that would be a deontological principle. If you say it is okay to lie to spare someone's feelings, that would be a consequentialist statement. For many, many things, it makes perfect sense for us to be consequentialist in our ethics. But when it comes to freedom of speech, freedom of inquiry, presumption of innocence, and all of these foundational values, they have to be deontological. If you violate that, you no longer have the Western tradition. No more identity politics and victimology poker and all that bullshit. No more coddling of the culture of offense and the ethos of perpetual victimhood. My family left execution, myself included, left Lebanon under imminent threat of execution. My parents were kidnapped and tortured by Fatah. My wife's family left Lebanon because they too faced the hardships of what was happening in Lebanon. Her ancestors fled the Armenian genocide. My grandparents escaped from Syria because of the endemic Jew hatred 70 years ago. My brother-in-law's family escaped Egypt, Alexandria, because of the Jew hatred in the 40s and 50s in Egypt. So we have faced real victimology of the worst kind within our lifetimes, yet we don't wallow in it all day long. We recognize that it is part of our history, and an important part of our history, but what makes us who we are is that we overcome that. What you're taught in the West is the exact opposite. The only way you ascend the hierarchy is to be the biggest victim and the biggest whiner, and if you're not a real victim, then manufacture a victimhood story as per Jussie Smollett, and therefore, hopefully, you can get the ego strokes that you want. A just society is rooted in the ethos of meritocracy. We are not social ants. The reason why I use the ant analogy is because when E.O. Wilson, the famous Harvard biologist, was asked, he's an entomologist, he studied social ants. When he was asked, what are your views on socialism/communism, professor? He said, great idea, wrong species. Ants have evolved to be communistic. Humans have not. That's why it has been tried in a million different places, and it always results in the same outcome. But yet here in the United States, you have a guy who is a Islamist sympathizer and a socialist who's going to become the mayor of the center of capitalism and historically Jewish life called New York City. Good luck, United States. Promote an ethos of intellectual and political diversity. All ideas are open to mockery, derision. Nothing is sacrosanct. There are no sacred cows. I'm going to skip these. I'll skip these also. How to save the West. I only have a couple of more slides, so bear with me. How to save the West. In order for the West to win the civilizational battle, it must proudly and unequivocally defend Western values, reject cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is basically the idea of who are you to judge whether another culture decides that we should cut off the clitorises of 5-year-old girls. Don't be a cultural imperialist. No, I am a cultural imperialist. You don't have the right to cut off the clitorises of 5-year-old girls. And certainly if you come into my country, we don't condone that here. Have that pride. Defend your principles. Number 3, recommit to individual dignity over the celebration of collective identity, recognize that all cultures are not equal, recognize that religious beliefs are not equally consistent with Western values, recognize that all immigrants are not equally likely to assimilate and adopt Western values, and so on and so forth. I'll skip this. I'll end with this. I won't read this whole passage just so that we could have a bit more time to chat. But in chapter 8, the last chapter of the Parasitic Mind, I implore people to activate their inner honey badger. And the reason why I use the honey badger as the representation of what I'm trying to say is because it turns out that the honey badger has been ranked as the fiercest of all animals by zoologists. And why is that? Well, because it's the size of a small to medium-sized dog, and yet it is insanely ferocious. You could have 6 adult lions approach it, and when they see Mr. Honey Badger, they go, "Sorry, sir, didn't mean to interrupt," and they cross to the other side of the road. Why does he do that? Well, because he may not be tall, but he's the tallest. He's the fiercest. He doesn't give an F, as the term goes, right? Honey badgers don't give an F. Now, when I implore people to activate their inner honey badger, I'm not saying be violent, but I'm saying that stand tall in defending principles. Don't nod quietly as your professor espouses nonsense. Now, I'm not saying that you should be impolite or cantankerous or rude, but I'm saying that any opportunity that you have to defend our Western values, you should take that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Hey, if any of you have questions, you can scan the QR code either up here on the screen or on that handout on your tables, and you can go ahead and enter a question, and it'll go to Ari's handy little iPad that he has in hand now to ask Dr. Saad. So, thanks.
I'm a PC kind of guy, so this is not working out so well for me. But if you have questions, send them on over and I'll figure out how to use it. That was absolutely brilliant. And I'm suddenly very aware of the fact that I'm a few credits shy of graduating college. So I look at what you talked about what's happening on college campuses. The first time you and I met was at Turning Point USA.
Right.
And you came walking over to my booth, just like I have one set up here, and you noticed the yarmulke on my head.
Right.
And you said, "You can't wear that on my college campus."
I said, try wearing
that on my college
and
campus.
let me know how it goes for you.
Exactly. You talked about, and Chris said it completely correct, you talk like you're 10 years ahead of us, but at the same time, I'm seeing this kind of stuff happening at the University of Washington here. Yeah. And now that I've gotten public disclosure requests of their emails, it's even worse than we all knew. So you talk about action items. Can we fix what's going on at these colleges?
You can, but it's going to require the stomach to do so, right? It is impossible to implement many of the autocorrective measures that need to be implemented without breaking any eggs, right? So, for example, when you're now trying to deport millions of people who are illegally here, and then somebody finds an example of someone who is supposedly Father of the Year from Maryland, then people use that exemplar as, look how evil and heartless these deportation processes are. You simply have to have the strength of your convictions and go unencumbered by any of that nonsense, be a honey badger and do it. And in a sense, you guys are very lucky in that, at least for the next 4 years, you do have a honey badger in power. He's called Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. In Canada, we've really evolved into a new species. I call both Canadians and academics the invertebrate castrati. They both have no spines or no testicles. And so all Canadian politicians are just one endless sequence of complete castrati.
So, as you mentioned something like that, we're talking about what Donald Trump and the Trump administration, Department of Education, work like what Chris is doing, exposing this kind of stuff. And yet what we see is they're changing the names of the DEI programs. Yeah. They're just changing them to something new. And they said, oh, well, we're going to appoint a new DEI person. We'll call it something else, and they're going to fix all these problems so we don't lose all this funding. Are you worried about a massive swing back if the Democrats win in 2026, 2028?
Right. That's a great question. So this is why I tell people, don't be complacent because Donald Trump won. Yes, he might be able to reverse a lot of the insanity during the time that he's in office. But it took, depending on the parasitic idea that I might be talking about in the book, it took between 50 to 80 years for these parasitic ideas to first be spawned on university campuses and then proliferate to every nook and cranny of society. So it'll take a lot more than just Donald Trump for everything to be reversed. So the battle, hopefully it won't be 50 to 80 years, but it's going to be a much longer cultural battle than just the tenure of Donald Trump.
So you look at Canada, which is a more extreme version of what's happening in the United States. Do you think Canada is beyond saving? Because I look at that, and when people joke, oh, we want to make them the 51st state, I said, do you really want to add all those provinces as blue states? That's probably not the best idea. Maybe we get Alberta out of it.
You know, it's funny that you say this, because when Donald Trump won his second term, I put out a tweet. I don't remember the exact words, so I'm paraphrasing. I said, dear, and I tagged him, dear Donald Trump, as a Canadian, I can assure you that somewhere between 4 to 8 soldiers from the United States should be able to conquer Canada in a week or two. So, I mean, it is so unbelievably clear that I'm being facetious. My university received, I don't know, hundreds of letters saying that I should be fired because I was treasonous and calling for a military coup against Canada. This is the state that we're in.
Amazing. I look at the Sydney Sweeney ad for a second. And you look at something like that and you go, oh, the 80s are back, or the 90s are back, right. And maybe this is a return to normal where you see the average person looks at that and says, well, this is marketing. You're trying to sell jeans, and we know what sells. But then I look at the 12%. Yes, there was a poll done by YouGov on this, who said that the ad was glorifying Nazism and eugenics. Do you think that if the average person, we talk about the silent majority all the time, do you think that's the key to victory? Because you look at all the people who went and bought jeans, or the stock price going up, and do you think that if more people actually stepped up, that might be the solution?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm so active in the public arena, right? I mean, for all of the fame and notoriety and so on, it's also very difficult to be me on a daily basis. I receive endless hate. I have to walk around with protection. I can't walk into campus. So there are a lot of costs that I incur beyond just the fact that, oh, I'm protected by tenure, right? I can't ever show photos of my children or wife, and that's why you never see any. And yet I do it, precisely to your point, because I'm always trying to help people catch courage. Courage is contagious, right? I get a lot of people who write to me and say, you know, after watching X number of videos of yours, I've decided to speak out at the school meeting or against my professor who was espousing some nonsense. So the reality is that, so when I put on my optimistic hat, I say, we can easily win this battle because the silent majority is truly way ahead in the lead in terms of it's more than 88 to 12%. Almost everybody that I speak to hates the stuff, but the loud minority are the ones who keep the rest of us in check. So if I can get people to light their courage, the fire under their feet, then I think we can solve this problem by next Tuesday. The problem is that, you know, there's the 7 deadly sins. Well, I've always said that we need to add an 8th sin called cowardice. It is unbelievable how frightened people are of their shadow. And especially in academia, where you would have thought that having tenure is precisely the mechanism that protects you from being fired. That's why you have tenure, so that you could speak freely, and that yet most people overestimate the disastrous consequences of not being invited to the cool kids party. So even though privately they might say to me, you know, I agree with you, I hate Justin Trudeau, they will never post it because all of their faculty members love Justin Trudeau. So you have to kind of break out of your apathy and your cowardice, and hopefully there'll be better days in the future.
Do you think anybody in this room should send their kids to college?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that universities are irrevocably damaged. I think the key is to make sure that you spend your time wisely in university. So don't take, underwater lesbian dance therapy. Don't do this kind of stuff. Study neuroscience and study, it's a whole bunch of stuff. I don't want to, whatever I say, somebody's going to be offended. You could even study Shakespeare, but it wedded to reason, right? But rather than decolonize all authors who happen to be straight white men, right? So make sure to have your kids attend the right university. By the way, the reason why I chose the two universities that I've been doing visiting professorships at the last 2 years is precisely because they imbue the types of values that I would want my kids to attend that university. And so pick your schools carefully, and I think it'll be all fine.
You talk a lot in your book about social contagion,
Yes.
idea pathogens.
Right.
And we see that happening in high schools. We see that happening in middle schools. We see that happening everywhere. What are some tools people can use to combat that when the schools have their kids for 8 or more hours a day?
Just be involved. There's no magic recipe. So I'll give you an example. And this is a story about my daughter. So I think she was maybe in grade 5 or 6. Her science teacher had put up sort of a moniker of #BLM or whatever it was at the time, around 2020, 2021. And I wrote a very polite but honey badgerish type of email to the principal saying, look, I'm a university professor and I don't walk into a classroom and espouse my political beliefs. If I'm tasked with teaching evolutionary psychology, I talk about evolutionary psychology. There's a place for me to talk about Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump, and it's not when I'm teaching evolutionary psychology. And that's why I'm very disciplined in my pedagogic pursuits. And so your science teacher should not have this bullshit BLM and Free Palestine and so on. And guess what? She took it down, right? Now, it might be because I happen to be Saad, and maybe she's a bit worried that given my reach, I might cause a hole. But even if you have a small voice, don't underestimate the power of your voice. Not everybody has Joe Rogan's reach, and not everybody has Elon Musk's reach, but don't think that your voice doesn't matter. Your voice, and your voice, and suddenly we get rid of the idea pathogens.
We go to the text line.
Yes.
And we take a look, and I see a lot of listeners of the Ari Hoffman Show out there because I've seen a lot of these questions before. This is a good one. How does one have empathy for the people in Gaza without embracing a parasitic version of supporting Hamas?
Well, a child who doesn't know about the ideological commitments of Israel or Palestine is worthy of our empathy, right? I was that child growing up in Lebanon, and I didn't deserve to die because I was born into this group or that group. So it is perfectly natural for us to see any dreadful image of innocent people being killed on either side and feel empathy for them. But I don't have empathy for the ideological commitments that the Palestinian societies have consistently taken, right? They have received, I don't know the exact number, but certainly hundreds of billions of dollars over the past, since 1948, to have been able to build a paradise on the Mediterranean Sea 100-fold over, but they made the ideological commitment that there was no greater thing that they can do than to eradicate those pesky Jews that lived next door. So I have infinite empathy to individual innocent Palestinians and zero empathy to the ideological forces that organize Palestinian society.
Follow-up question to that one, and this one I'm very interested in your take on, because I know how I would answer this one.
Okay.
But why the hatred for the Jews specifically?
That's a great question. It's a long answer, but I'll give you one particular answer that comes from my psychological training. So a very powerful effect in psychology is known as the self-serving bias. The self-serving bias refers to how people attribute causality to their life events. So people tend to attribute successes internally and failures externally, right? So I did very well on the exam because I'm very smart and I studied hard. That's an internal attribution. If I did poorly on the exam, I did very poorly on the exam because Professor Saad is a mean bastard Jew, right? So I'm attributing failures externally. Now imagine if all of my failures can be readily attributed to an external agent called the diabolical Jew. It rained today, it's the Jew's fault. I didn't get the loan from the bank. Who controls the banks? The Jews. Your son is addicted to pornography. Who controls pornography? The Jews. Of course, these things might objectively not be true, but it becomes very easy to attribute all of my personal and collective failures on one group. But the next question that then begs to be asked, but why should the Jew be the one that we attribute all those failures? And here, there's a very easy answer, and that is that Jewish people have always held the status of what Amy Chua, who's the mentor of J.D. Vance, she's the law professor at Yale and a friend of mine, she calls Jews, among other people, minority dominant, I can't remember the exact term, meaning they're a very small group within a much larger society, yet they are overrepresented in their success. It's not only Jews that have this quality, but certainly Jews have had it more often than any other group across more societies than any other group, right? So anywhere you go, you look at who's leading in academia. I mean, Jews have won nearly 25% of Nobel Prizes. They make up 0.2% of all people, right? And there's a reason why learning is so important for the Jewish cause, but we don't have to talk about it here. And so it becomes very easy when I'm consistently failing in my endeavors to look at this minuscule group of assholes over there who are the head of the bank, the head of the philanthropy group, the wealthiest guys. There must be something satanic and evil about them that they are consistently on top despite the fact that they are so minuscule. Therefore, that proves my point that they are satanic, and hence it serves my self-serving bias.
I think this is my favorite question from the audience today. I'm going to read it verbatim. We have a few young women in the audience here who have spoken up to protect female athletes competing against males who identify as girls. They've taken a lot of backlash. What kind of advice would you offer them?
Keep going. Keep speaking truth, right? Riley Gaines, I mean, it's great that Riley Gaines has the voice that she has and that she's a honey badger, but imagine for a second, stop back and think, in the 21st century, a woman is getting all these accolades for telling the world that it is unfair in women's sports to have men compete in those sports. What a hero, right? And I'm not minimizing. It really did take courage on her part. But imagine how parasitized. And let me put this in context. This is an actual number. The estimate of the number of humans that have lived since Homo sapiens came to be is about 117 billion people. Okay. So until 15 minutes ago, the 117 billion people that have ever existed seem to be able to fully understand the very complicated conundrum of identifying who is male and female. It turns out that each one of your ancestors was able to exactly understand that, but now we need Riley Gaines to explain to us that it is unfair. That is exactly why the parasitic mind has so resonated, because it takes a zombified mind to be able to be discussing such issues in the 21st century.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And remember, you can get Professor Saad's book out in the lobby, The Parasitic Mind.
All right, fantastic.